When King Jaehaerys II died, suddenly after a short illness in the year 262 AC at the age of 37, the throne passed to his son and heir, Prince Aerys, now King Aerys II Targaryen. The new king was only 18 years of age when he came to the throne. While of course this is young, he was not the youngest king to sit the Iron Throne, with several of his forebearers being even younger. Aerys would wear the crown previously worn by King Aegon IV and Daeron II, a large and heavy crown of red gold, each of its points a dragon's head, with gemstone eyes. Despite his young age and the shock of his ascension, there was a general mood of optimism across the realm and at court, as Aerys had already proven himself a worthy prince of House Targaryen during the War of the Nine Penny Kings, fighting alongside his friends, Tywin Lannister and Steffon Baratheon, with Aerys even earning his knighthood during the war. While of course, none of this exactly has much bearing on the kind of king Aerys would ultimately be, it did help make the transition of power much more stable than it otherwise could have been. It was helped that Aerys was surrounded by seasoned counsellors and advisors, some of whom have been at court since at the very least start of the reign of his grandfather, King Aegon V. But once in place as king, Aerys had his own mind about who should be advising him. With this fresh young king would also come a crop of fresh young counsellors to King's Landing. With the new king also came a new queen, Aerys' younger sister and wife, Queen Rhaegar Targaryen. Their marriage had been arranged by their father, King Jaehaerys II, when both were young, with neither Aerys or Rhaegar having any desire for the match. In fact, many recall that the siblings had no real love or interest in each other at all. If anything, they actively disliked each other. Their father was convinced to arrange the match by a woods witch, whom had told him of the prophecy of the prince who was promised, and that it would come from the line of Aerys and Rhaegar. After their marriage, Rhaegar gave Aerys a son and heir, a boy they named Rhaegar, born in the year 259 AC, as the fires raged at the tragedy of Summerhall. Even with the birth of the prince, for the first time since the Dance of the Dragons, the number of members of House Targaryen was at a dangerously low level, with the line of succession very unclear after Aerys and Prince Rhaegar. Of course, a cousin or other kin could be found if need be, but many felt a succession crisis such as this would of course come with bloodshed if it did in fact come to pass. Thus, it was imperative for Aerys and Rhaegar to secure the future of House Targaryen by producing more heirs. The queen would give the king lots of children. Soon after, Prince Rhaegar would become Joanna Targaryen, and then a Daeron Targaryen, with both children sadly dying in the cradle, an issue that would plague the king and queen for the rest of their lives. Though not the most diligent of princes, nor the most intelligent, Aerys did have an undeniable charm that won him many friends, and his court would come to reflect this side of him, with feasts, hunts, balls and tourneys. But Aerys was also a vain man, proud and changeable, traits that made him easy prey for flatterers and lickspittles, men who wished to use the king's nature to climb the ladder of power. But what is important to recall is these flaws were not immediately apparent to most at the time of his ascension to the Iron Throne. For the most part, the small council King Aerys had inherited from his father had been made up largely of older, seasoned men, many of whom had served during the reigns of King Aegon V, and some even as far back as King Maekar. Once Aerys was firmly in place as king, one of his first acts was to dismiss his small council, one and all, replacing them with lords of his own generation. Most notably, he retired the aged and extremely cautious Hand, Edgar Salone, who had been Hand since the death of the last Hand, Ormond Baratheon, during the War of the Nine Penny Kings, and named in his place Sir Tywin Lannister, the heir to Casterly Rock. At 20 years of age, Sir Tywin thus became the youngest Hand of the King in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin and Aerys had of course been friends for many years, and Aerys was particularly impressed of how Tywin had handled the Rain Tarback uprising a few years earlier. Many maesters to this day insist that his appointment as Hand was the wisest thing Aerys ever did. At the time, some felt he would become known as Aerys the Wise. Other younger men were also brought in as well. There were two exceptions from King Aerys' purge of the small council. Grand Maester Pycelle kept his role, as was to be expected, as well as the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower. Pycelle was 46 years of age in 262 AC, and while much older than the king and his small council, was still considered relatively young for a Grand Maester. Thus, King Aerys the Wise set about his reign, and the future of Westeros looked bright in the hands of the king and his young hand Tywin. But not even the wisest of men, the likes of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, could have predicted what was to come in the next few years. How could anyone have known that King Aerys II would in time be known as the Mad King? That this once promising reign would ultimately put an end to near 300 years of Targaryen rule in Westeros and almost destroy the House of the Dragon itself. Even as Aerys donned his crown in that fateful year of 262 AC, the key figures of his doom were born on the shores of Shipbreaker Bay. A lusty black-haired son named Robert had just been born to his cousin and close friend Lord Steffon Baratheon and his lady wife at Storm's End. At the same time, far to the north at Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, Lord Rickard Stark celebrated the birth of his own son and heir, Brandon. Then another Stark, Eddard, would follow within a year. Just as we could never have known the fate of the Mad King Aerys at the time, little could anyone have foreseen the critical role all three of these infants would play in the downfall of the dragon, and how they would leave Westeros fundamentally changed forever. The rise of Aerys II Targaryen to the Iron Throne in 262 AC was not just the rise of a new young king, but also of a new generation of young lords whom would rule the realm alongside Aerys. Of all of these men, arguably the most important and vital was the young Tywin Lannister, the king's closest friend, and arguably a man who would leave as big of a mark on the history of Westeros as Aerys himself. When maesters say making Tywin the hand of the king was the wisest thing Aerys ever did, they do not lie. Despite Tywin's role in events to come in the downfall of House Targaryen, you cannot deny the young heir to Casterly Rock was among the best men to ever take the role of Hand of the King, and a case could be put forward that he was in fact the best, given the scale of the impact he would have on the Seven Kingdoms, even after the downfall of House Targaryen. Tywin was born in the year 242 AC to Lord Titus Lannister and his lady wife Jane Marbrand. Being the eldest son of Titus, Tywin was the heir to Casterly Rock. As a young man, he was described as tall, slender, broad-shouldered, with the golden hair and green eyes typical of House Lannister. Once he began to age, Tywin would keep his golden hair shaved, since he had started to go bald, but instead he grew out a bushy golden side whiskers. However, in his youth, it is known he had thick, long, golden hair, and when he started to lose his hair is not entirely clear. Even as a young man, Tywin was calculating, intelligent, politically astute, and ruthless. He would dedicate his life and efforts towards maintaining the Lannisters' prestige and ensuring House Lannister was respected, or at least feared, something that had become lessened under the rule of his father, Titus. Tywin was made a knight at a young age and became tested and proven in battle during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. While many lords would tend to lead their men from the front line, Tywin prefers to lead from the rear to better coordinate his men. On the battlefield, it is said he had a powerful presence combined with an intimidating gaze. When Lord Titus agreed to marry his daughter, Tywin's sister, Jenna, to Aemon Frey, the second son of Lord Walder Frey, just to please the Lord of the Crossing to gain his favour, it very much angered Tywin. The betrothal was announced at a feast in 252 AC, with most of the Western lords in attendance. Upon the announcement, Lord Roger Rayne left the hall and Ellen Rayne laughed aloud at such a poor match for Lord Titus's daughter, but only the 10-year-old Tywin spoke out against the wedding because he thought it an uneven match. Shortly after the incident, Titus sent Tywin to King's Landing to serve as a royal page and cupbearer at King Aegon V Targaryen's court, where Tywin would go on to befriend the young Prince Aerys Targaryen and Steffon Baratheon, the heir to Storm's End. His cousin, Joanna Lannister, Tywin's future wife, also served at the royal court, as a companion and lady-in-waiting to Princess Rhaegar Targaryen since the year 259 AC. During the War of the Ninepenny Kings in 260 AC, 11,000 Westermen were under the command of Tywin's uncle, Sir Jason Lannister, and was sent to fight beside the other forces of the Iron Throne in the Stepstones. Tywin, who was already a knight, joined the Lannister forces, as did his brothers Kevin and Tyget as squires. It is said that Tywin served with valour during the war, impressing many men his senior, winning him the respect of countless lords and knights who took part in the defence of the realm. The young Prince Aerys served as a squire during the war, and when he won his knighthood, Tywin was granted the great honour of knighting his friend. After Tywin returned home from the Stepstones, since his father, Lord Tytos, was a weak ruler who was taken advantage of by his bannermen, Tywin and his brothers set out to restore the prestige of House Lannister that had slowly been eroded away. Tytos protested feebly before returning to his mistress. Tywin demanded repayment of gold his father had lent out brazenly to many of his bannermen, big and small, and those who could not repay immediately had to send a hostage to Casterly Rock until their debt was settled. Sir Kevin Lannister was given command of 500 veteran knights from the Stepstones and tasked with ridding the Westerlands of robber knights and outlaws. Sir Harris Swift, the Knight of the Cornfield, surrendered his daughter Dorna to Kevin's custody, but Roger Rayne, Lord of Castamere, reportedly laughed at Tywin's edict. When Lord Walderin Tarbeck of Tarbeck Hall rode to confront Tytos, who was not present at Casterly Rock, the young Tywin ordered Walderan imprisoned for disloyalty. Walderin's wife, Ellen Rayne, responded by seizing Tywin's cousin Stafford and 2 Lannisters of Lannisport. Lord Titus ordered the hostages be exchanged and forgave House Tarbeck's debt to House Lannister, directly undermining Tywin's attempts to restore respect to the Lannister name. Late in the year 261 AC, Tywin provoked House Rayne and Tarbeck by ordering that Roger Rayne and Walderan Tarbeck appear at Casterly Rock to answer for their crimes. When the accused instead renounced their allegiances to House Lannister, Tywin would raise an army without his lordly father's leave, a bold move by such a young man, and would be seen as a statement for intent of the kind of person Tywin would grow into in years to come. Tywin defeated Walderin in battle, and then destroyed Tarbeck Hall, the seat of House Tarbeck, with Ellen Rayne dying during Tarbeck Hall's collapse. Tywin then went on to defeat Roger Rayne, who would flee back to his seat of Castamere. Instead of waiting for the subterranean castle to surrender after a long siege, Tywin ended the Rayne-Tarbeck revolt by diverting a nearby stream into Castamere directly, drowning the entirety of House Rayne within, in arguably an act that Tywin will forever be known for. But it did restore the feared reputation of House Lannister, and meant there would be true consequences for crossing Tywin, as the young heir to Casterly Rock destroyed these ancient houses root and stem in the blink of an eye. The ruined castles were ordered to be left as reminders of the fate that awaited those who scorned the power of Casterly Rock and House Lannister. The famous song, The Rains of Castamere, was written as a tribute to the event. When Lord Farman of Faircastle began to cause issues for Tywin years later, Tywin had an envoy perform the song with a lute. Suddenly, Lord Farman caused no further trouble after hearing the message. When his friend, Aerys Targaryen, suddenly found himself king after the early death of King Jaehaerys II in 262 AC, impressed at the way Tywin had handled the Rayne-Tarbeck revolt, King Aerys summoned the heir to the Rock to King's Landing, naming him the Hand of the King, the youngest in history at only 20 years of age, and with that, events were put in motion that could never be undone. While of course, the young King Aerys II and his equally young hand Tywin Lannister were close friends, there were many at court and beyond who felt that this was an unlikely partnership. Aerys was said to be lively and energetic, with his courts very active during the early years of his reign, with there seemingly always being some form of hunt, feast, ball, or some other event celebrating even the most inconsequential of reasoning. Aerys, most of all, was said to be fond of young women, Thus, his court was filled with the fairest maidens from across all four corners of the Seven Kingdoms, and even a handful from the free cities across the Narrow Sea, hoping to win the favour of the new king. There are some accounts that go as far as to claim that Aerys in fact had as many, if not more mistresses than the infamous glutton king Aegon IV, the Unworthy, whose countless mistresses and bastards born to them would lead to the Blackfyre rebellions that would plague House Targaryen for generations. How factual these claims of mistresses are, we can never be sure, but we do know they did exist. The key difference between Aerys and Aegon was Aerys was always seemed to lose interest in his lovers quickly, with many of them not remaining in his favour for longer than a fortnight, with the longest around half a year. And most important of all, as far as we can tell, Aerys never fathered bastards on any of these women. So why did many feel Aerys and Tywin were an unlikely partnership? Everything Aerys loved, the balls, feasts, grand hunts, mistresses, Tywin seemed to actively dislike. It was thought that sooner rather than later, this would cause a divide between the king and his hand. It did in truth not come to pass. Well, certainly not for those reasons. There is another school of thought that the opposing personalities of Aerys and Tywin is exactly what made the partnership in those early years work so effectively, with the nature of Tywin tempering the more excessive of Aerys. Like many kings in a time of peace, Aerys was full of grand schemes, with most of them never coming to fruition. Not long after his coronation, Aerys announced his intent to conquer the Stepstones, like the countless kings before him, and make them officially a part of his realm for all of time. While ambitious given how over the 262 years of Targaryen rule in Westeros, the Stepstones have been used time and time again by the likes of the Triarchy, pirates and the Blackfyres to launch attacks on Westeros, having direct control over the island chain, granting the lands to new lords, and de facto making them a new kingdom of Westeros did make sense in that regard. It would provide security and protection for the mainland, and allow House Targaryen effective control of shipping in and out of the Narrow Sea, which would then make them impossibly rich with gold. But for those exact same reasons is why the likes of the free cities wish to control the islands themselves, and why they had effectively been a no man's land since their formation. No one power could allow another to have that kind of control over them, and thus, in the end, these plans of Aerys were forgotten. In 264 AC, a visit to King's Landing was made by Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell, who had made the long trip to the south to meet the small council regarding many pressing political matters in relation to the north. These talks with Lord Rickard then awakened Aerys' interest in his northernmost kingdom, and from then on, Aerys hatched a plan. A very ambitious, seemingly impossible plan, but one he publicly brought forward nonetheless. Aerys wanted to build a new wall 100 leagues north of the existing one and claim the thousands of kilometers of land in between in the name of House Targaryen and the Seven Kingdoms. What Aerys intended to do with this new land was not known, or where he would even find the population who would be happy to live there. Winters in the north were harsh enough, and they would get even harsher the further north beyond the wall you travelled. Who would live in these lands? Who would rule over the small folk? How would the Night's Watch, who was already in a steady state of decline, be able to man this new wall? Questions we will never know the answer to. Put simply, the magic and technology that had built the wall have been lost to time. To create something similar now would be nigh on impossible, and even if you could, the copious amounts of raw material, and most importantly gold needed to do so, would beggar the Seven Kingdoms for generations. But soon enough, like his women and most of his schemes, Aerys once again lost interest in this dream. In 265 AC, King Aerys became offended by the stink of King's Landing and claimed he could not escape it even in the lavish rooms of the Red Keep. While attempts were made to clean up the city at the king's insistence, the improvements did not satisfy Aerys. He began to speak often of building a white city entirely of marble on the south bank of the Blackwater Rush, opposite King's Landing. How serious these plans were we cannot know. It is likely they were discussed by the small council, with the Master of Coin eventually putting an end to the idea when delivering news on how much gold this project would cost and how long this new city would take to build. King's Landing in itself was still a very new city, having been nothing more than 3 empty hills when Aegon the Conqueror landed. The city grew extremely quickly and became more formally organised under the improvements of King Jaehaerys I. While there is still much to be done within King's Landing itself, the idea of building a new city so close was always going to be a non-starter, and much like his dream of a new wall, this one also faded quickly. But a positive to be taken from this fixation of Aerys is King's Landing did itself see a lot of improvement or renovation and repairs that had been needed over the last few decades. In 267 AC, after a dispute with the Iron Bank of Braavos regarding certain amounts of money borrowed by his father King Jaehaerys II during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, Aerys announced that he would build the largest war fleet in the history of the world to bring the Titan of Braavos to his knees. Again, nothing ever came of this, and no war fleet was built. However, the dispute with the Iron Bank of Braavos was resolved, especially as the Iron Bank is well known for not letting their investments go unpaid. Without them enforcing the debt, other banks and debtors would see the bank as weak. It's not known how exactly the debt was settled, but it is speculated that the Hand of the King, Tywin Lannister, managed to negotiate an accord to satisfy both the Iron Bank and the King, but it is assumed he did so as the issue was never raised by Aerys again for the rest of his rule. There is some speculation, unconfirmed at that Tywin Lannister used some of House Lannister's vast fortune to settle the matter himself, the crown owing the sum of money to House Lannister personally than the formidable Iron Bank. In 270 AC, during a visit to Sunspear in Dorne, Aerys told the Prince of Dorne that he wished to make the Dornish deserts bloom by digging a great underground canal beneath the mountains to bring water down from the rainwood. This proposal, as we have learned with the many others the king had suggested, was never truly entertained in a serious capacity. But the Prince of Dorne and the small council did go along with the king's new fixation until it once again faded and was replaced anew. Despite all of his grandiose plans never coming to fruition, indeed nearly all were forgotten by King Aerys II within a moon's turn, as the king seemed to grow more bored with his royal enthusiasms as quickly as he did his royal paramours, much to the headache of the small council. And yet, despite the king's eccentricities, the Seven Kingdoms prospered greatly during the first decade of King Aerys II's reign, with some comparisons starting to be made to that of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, mostly by men who did not know Aerys all that well as they thought they did. But when we look back at history with the knowledge of events to come, it did seem there was one sole reason the realm prospered so much during this early period of Aerys' reign: Tywin Lannister, the Hand of the King. He managed to counteract much of Aerys' whim with his own ability as a ruler. The king's young hand was all the king himself was not: diligent, decisive, tireless, fierce, intelligent, just and stern, and very quickly Tywin won the respect of the men at court whom doubted his fitness for the role, given his age. In a very short time, Tywin had become considered one of the best men to ever take the role of Hand of the King. The gods made and shaped this man to rule. Grand Maester Pycelle wrote of Tywin Lannister in a letter to the Citadel after serving with him on the small council for less than 2 years, and rule is what Tywin Lannister did. As the king's own behaviour grew increasingly erratic as the years passed, more and more of the day-to-day running of the realm fell to his hand, while many kings gave their hands a loose leash, allowing them to indulge in the finer aspects of being king. The kind of decisions Tywin Lannister was being allowed to make on Aerys' behalf is the kind of power of a regent for a king, not yet a man grown. Regardless of the issues with Aerys himself, the realm was prospering under Tywin Lannister's stewardship, so much so that King Aerys' endless eccentricities did not seem too troublesome. Many Targaryens before him had exhibited similar behaviour without great cause for concern. From Old Town to the Wall, men began to say that Aerys might wear the crown, but it was Tywin Lannister who ruled the realm. The reality is that statement was very close to being true in reality. It was Tywin Lannister who settled the crown's dispute with the Braavosi, though without Aerys' wish of making the Titan kneel, much to his displeasure. He did so by repaying the money lent to Jaehaerys II with gold from Casterly Rock, thereby taking the debt upon himself. Then, Tywin won the admiration of many great lords by repealing what remained of the laws King Aegon V had enacted to curb their power, and thus, at Tywin Lannister's hand, the legacy of King Aegon V had worked so hard to build. His dream of bettering the lives of his small folk was now naught but memories, consigned to the pages of history. Tywin also reduced tariffs and taxes on shipping, going in and out of the cities of King's Landing, Lannisport and Old Town, thus winning the support of many wealthy merchants. Tywin built new roads and repaired old ones. While many of the roads built by King Jaehaerys I during the early part of his reign did help in uniting Westeros, bringing it together, the side effect of this was the sheer amount of footfall they have seen over the centuries. They were starting to show their age, thus the repairs and upkeep by Tywin was greatly appreciated by all. Tywin also held many splendid tournaments about the realm to the delight of the knights and commons, fronting the cost himself, not in the name of House Lannister, but the name of Aerys, winning the king the love of the small folk. Tywin both cultivated trade with the free cities and sternly punished bakers found guilty of adding sawdust to their bread and butchers selling horse meat as beef. In all, these efforts were greatly aided by Grand Maester Pycelle, whose accounts of the reign of King Aerys II gives us the best portrait of this era. Yet, despite all of these accomplishments, Tywin Lannister was little loved by his fellow lords or the small folk, with him having a sour reputation for many. His rivals charged that he was humorless, unforgiving, unbending, proud and cruel. His lords bannermen respected him and followed him loyally into war and peace, but none could truly name him as a friend. Tywin despised his father, the weak-willed, fat and ineffectual Lord Tytos Lannister, and his relations with his brothers, Tygert and Geryon, were notoriously stormy. He showed more regard and fondness for his brother Kevin, a close confidant and constant companion since childhood, and his sister, Jenna. But yet, even in those cases, Tywin Lannister appeared more publicly as dutiful than affectionate. In 263 AC, after a year as the king's hand, Tywin married his beautiful young cousin, Joanna Lannister, who would come to King's Landing in 259 AC for the coronation of King Jaehaerys II, and remained thereafter as a lady-in-waiting to Princess, later Queen, Rhaegar. The bride and groom had known each other since they were children, together at Casterly Rock. Though Tywin Lannister was not a man to give public displays, it is said that his love for his lady wife was so deep and long-abiding that only Lady Joanna truly knew the man beneath the armour. Grand Maester Pycelle wrote to the Citadel, "All his smiles belong to her, and her alone. I do avow that I have even observed her make him laugh, not once, but on 3 separate occasions." As was very well documented, even before their marriage, a match neither Aerys or Rhaegar desired. Their relationship was cold and one of reluctant duty. Thus, it is fair to say the marriage between the king and queen was not a happy one. As the old wives' tales often say, and history can often display, is that a happy marriage between monarchs is often a great benefit to the realm. More troubled marriages tend to spell trouble for the realm and her people, and it's safe to say Aerys and Rhaegar's marriage was troubled. But it would take many, many years for the issues between Aerys and Rhaegar to bear its fruit. Despite King Aerys' often very public infidelities, Queen Rhaegar, like many queens and ladies before her, turned a blind eye to her husband's flights of fancy. But one thing Rhaegar did take great issue with was when her husband, to quote, turned her ladies into whores. Countless ladies were dismissed from her service, even if there was no basis to the idea they had been unfaithful. Even the hand, Tywin Lannister's wife, Lady Joanna Lannister, was eventually removed from her service, which in some ways started to sour the relationship between Tywin and Aerys. There are, of course, scandalous rumours from this time period that, while are only that, rumours, with no proven basis in reality, do bear importance enough to mention. As for Tywin Lannister, whose reputation means everything, such rumours, true or not, would surely have factored into the way events to follow eventually played out. The scandalous rumours suggested that Lady Joanna Lannister gave up her maidenhead to Prince Aerys the night of his father's coronation, and enjoyed a brief reign as his paramour after he ascended the Iron Throne. For many, there is clear and obvious reasons as to why there is little truth to these tales. As Grand Maester Pycelle indicated in his letters to the Citadel in Old Town, a man such as Tywin Lannister, hell-bent on restoring the reputation of his house, even overruling his own father to do so, would never have taken his cousin, Lady Joanna to wife, if these tales were remotely true. To quote Pycelle, for he was ever a proud man, and not one accustomed to feasting on another man's leavings. Given Tywin's position at court, if these tales of Aerys and Joanna were true, he would have known about them before his marriage to Joanna. Given what we know of Tywin Lannister, it's clear to understand why many see these tales as just that, tales. But, and it is an important stipulation, often with any rumour, there is always a grain of truth buried deep within, and this may very well be the case with King Aerys and Lady Joanna. It has been noted by several who witnessed the events itself that King Aerys took unwanted liberties with Lady Joanna's person during her bedding ceremony the night of her wedding to Tywin, much to Tywin's anger and displeasure. While the term of unwanted liberties is vague at best, we do know it was nothing as serious to have stopped the bedding itself, but, as we know, and has been reliably documented, it was soon after this that Lady Joanna was dismissed from Queen Rhaella's service with no reason ever documented officially. Unofficially, however, it does seem like the two events are connected. Thus, Lady Joanna left court and departed for Casterly Rock, and would seldom ever visit King's Landing for the rest of her husband's time as Hand of the King. Relations between the King and Queen grew even more strained when Rhaella proved unable to give Aerys any further children after the birth of their only son, Rhaegar, in 259 AC. She had several miscarriages in 263 and 264 AC. Each is said to have caused deep trauma to the Queen. In 267 AC, Rhaella did finally become pregnant and able to carry the babe to term. However, the girl was sadly stillborn, damaging Rhaella's frail mental state further. Late in the year 268 AC, the Queen fell pregnant again, carrying the babe to term, giving birth to a boy she named Daeron in 269 AC. The prince would only survive 6 months, and we have no record of how he died. Then came another stillbirth in 270, another miscarriage in 271, and Prince Aegon, born 2 months premature in 272, dead by 273. By this time, Prince Rhaegar was 14 years of age, with Rhaella not able to give the king another heir. Given Rhaegar's age, any hope of marrying him to a sister was now gone, and thus matches elsewhere would need to be considered. At first, in the early years of his reign, King Aerys did comfort Rhaella in her grief, but over time his compassion turned to suspicion that only grew deeper with each child that died. By 270 AC, he decided that the Queen was being unfaithful to him. The gods will not suffer a bastard to sit the Iron Throne, he told his small council. None of Rhaella's stillbirths, miscarriages, or dead princes had been his, the king proclaimed. Thereafter, he forbade the Queen to leave the confines of Maegor's Holdfast, and decreed that 2 scepters would henceforth share her bed every night, to see that she remains true to her vow. In truth, there is no record or even a rumour that Rhaella was ever unfaithful to the king, and some have speculated that if Aerys himself truly believed this, he surely would have had her executed for treason, thus allowing him to take a new wife who could give him heirs. Thus, on balance, most historians do not put stock in these claims. Oddly, for this time period, specifically around the issue of producing an heir, what the Hand, Tywin Lannister, made of the issues has not been recorded. But in 266 AC at Casterly Rock, Lady Joanna gave birth to a pair of twins, a girl born first, whom they named Cersei, and a boy, moments later, they named Jaime. They were both said to be healthy and beautiful, with hair like beaten gold. The birth of twins to Tywin only made tensions between Aerys and his Hand even worse, with Aerys once announcing in the presence of his queen that he appeared to have married the wrong woman. Nonetheless, the king sent each child its weight in gold as a name day gift, and commanded Tywin to bring them to court when they were old enough to travel, and to bring their mother too, for it had been far too long since he had gazed upon her face. The following year of 267 AC saw the death of Tywin's father, Lord Tytos, at the age of 64. It has been reported that he died of a burst heart as he was trying to climb the staircase of his latest mistress. With the passing of Tytos, Tywin became the Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, and thus returned to his seat for his father's funeral and to set the West in order. He offered to take Aerys with him as part of a royal progress. King agreed, but declined the offer to travel with Tywin personally. Though Aerys left the Queen behind in King's Landing, as her grace was yet again pregnant with a child who proved to be stillborn, he did take their then 8-year-old son, Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone, and more than half of the royal court. For the better part of the next year, the Seven Kingdoms were ruled from Lannisport and Casterly Rock, where both the king and his hand were in resident. The court of King Aerys II Targaryen returned to King's Landing in 268 AC from their extended stay at Casterly Rock, and governance resumed as before, as did the king slip back into his old habits, which were becoming even more erratic. It was plain for all to see that the once strong friendship between Aerys and his hand, Tywin Lannister, one that had once held so much promise for the future of Westeros, was fraying more and more each turn of the moon. Where previously Aerys had supported and sided with Tywin Lannister on most matters of substance that would impact the kingdom, now the two men began to disagree on even the most trivial of matters. During a trade war between the free city of Myr and Tyrosh on one hand, and Volantis on the other, Lord Tywin advocated a policy of neutrality. King Aerys saw more advantage in providing gold and arms to the volunteers directly involving the Seven Kingdoms in the war. When Tywin adjudicated yet another in a long-running border dispute between House Blackwood and House Bracken in favour of the Blackwoods, Aerys overruled him and gave the disputed mill to Lord Bracken. Over his hands and Master of Coin's strenuous objections, the king doubled the port fees at King's Landing and Old Town, and tripled them at Lannisport, and the realm's other ports and harbours as well. Never since Aegon's conquest have port fees in Westeros been this high, affecting not just the poorest of merchants, but even the richer and well-off, going so far as to damage the incomes of several lords. Soon after, a delegation of small lords and rich merchants came to the Iron Throne to complain. However, Aerys instead blamed the Hand for the policy, saying Lord Tywin shits gold, but of late he has been constipated and had to find some other way to fill our coffers, whereupon his grace restored the port fees and tariffs to their previous levels, earning much acclaim for himself and leaving Tywin cursed by many merchants throughout the land. However, it would not be for many years until after Robert's rebellion much of the truth of this matter came to light. The growing rift between the king and the king's hand was also apparent in matters of appointments. Whereas previously Aerys had always heeded Tywin's counsel when bestowing offices, honours and inheritances, often as Tywin would recommend, but after 270 AC he began to disregard the men put forward by Tywin in favour of men of his own choosing. Many Westermen found themselves dismissed from the king's service for no better cause than the suspicion they might be handsmen. In their places, King Aerys appointed his own favourites, but the king's favour had become a chancy thing, his mistrust easy to awaken. Even the Hand's own kin were not exempt from the royal displeasure. When Lord Tywin wished to name his brother Sir Tygert Lannister as the Red Keep's Master-at-Arms, King Aerys gave the post to Sir Willem Darry instead, just to spite Tywin. By this time, thanks to his favourites, who had gained places at court, King Aerys had become aware of the widespread belief that he himself was but a hollow figurehead, and Tywin Lannister was the true master of the Seven Kingdoms. To be fair to King Aerys, whilst he did still hold the power of a king, and the king's will was the king's will, the influence and control Tywin had was unlike any hand before him. In a sense, it could very well be seen that he was the most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms, and Tywin perhaps could have taken that further if he had so desired. These sentiments, no matter how true, greatly angered Aerys, and he became determined to disprove them, and to humble his overmighty servant, and put him back into his place. Many men of history do question, to this day, why Aerys, if he was so displeased with Tywin, did not dismiss him from service sooner. One leading theory is despite his pride, Aerys knew how effective Tywin was as Hand, which in turn made Aerys' life much easier. At the great anniversary tourney of 272 AC, held to commemorate Aerys' 10th year upon the Iron Throne, Joanna Lannister brought her 6-year-old twins, Jaime and Cersei, from Casterly Rock to present before the court. The king, very much in his cups, asked if giving suck to them had ruined her breasts, which were so high and proud. The question greatly amused Lord Tywin's rivals, who were always pleased to see the Hand slighted or made mock. but Lady Joanna was humiliated. Tywin Lannister, after this, attempted to return his chain of office the next morning, but the king refused to accept his resignation. Like discussed prior, Aerys could of course have dismissed Tywin Lannister at any time and named his own man as Hand of the King, but instead, for whatever reason, the king chose to keep his boyhood friend close by, labouring on his behalf, even as he began to undermine him in ways both great and small. Slights and jibes became ever more numerous. Courtiers hoping for advancement soon learnt that the quickest way to catch the king's eye was by making mock of his solemn, humourless hand. Yet, through all of this, Tywin Lannister suffered in silence and did his duty. In 273 AC, however, Lady Joanna was taken to childbed once again at Casterly Rock, where she died delivering Lord Tywin's second son, Tyrion. The babe was named, but he was malformed, dwarfish, with stunted legs and oversized head, with mismatched, demonic eyes. There were some reports also suggesting he had a tail, which was lopped off at his Lord Father's command. Lord Tywin's doom, the small folk called this ill-made creature, and Lord Tywin's bane. Upon hearing of the birth, King Aerys infamously said, "The gods cannot abide such arrogance." They have plucked a fair flower from his hand and giving him a monster in her place to teach him some humility at last. It was not long before reports of the king's remarks reached Lord Tywin as he grieved at Casterly Rock. Thereafter, no shred of old affection between the two men endured. Never a man to make a show of his emotions, Lord Tywin continued on as Hand of the King, dealing with daily tediums of the Seven Kingdoms, while the king grew ever more erratic, violent and suspicious. Aerys began to surround himself with informants, paying handsome rewards to men of dubious repute for whispers, lies and tales of treason, real or imagined. When one such report that the captain of the Hand's personal guard, a knight named Sir Ilyn Payne, had been heard boasting it was Lord Tywin who truly ruled the Seven Kingdoms, Aerys sent the Kingsguard to arrest him and had his tongue ripped out with red-hot pincers. Little did anyone know, however, just how worse things were about to become in the very near future. While King Aerys II Targaryen is known as the Mad King, a name he clearly did earn, many assume his fault of madness was a slow and gradual decline. While to some extent this is true, there were periods where his mental health did indeed improve, and glimpses of the promising young king he once was shined through, only for him to soon enough fall back into his old habits, harder and deeper than before. This was the case in 274 AC, where the king's madness seemed to abate for a time, when Queen Rhaegar gave birth to a son who seemed fit and healthy, and for a while the realm celebrated the birth of this healthy new prince, and a second son they called Jaehaerys, after Aerys' father, King Jaehaerys II. So profound was Aerys' joy that it seemed to restore in him his old self once again, with his relationship with Tywin Lannister improving greatly. Sadly for Aerys and Rhaegar and the realm, Prince Jaehaerys died later that same year, very suddenly, plunging Aerys into deeper despair and back into madness. In his black rage, he decided the babe's wet nurse was to blame and had the woman beheaded against the advice of his small council. Not long after, in a change of heart, Aerys announced that Jaehaerys had been poisoned by his own mistress, the pretty young daughter of one of his household knights. The king had the girl and all of her kin tortured to death. During the course of their torment, it is recorded all confessed to the murder, though the details of their confessions were greatly at odds and contradicting. Something the maesters of the Citadel have known for a long time is that torture is not the best method of extracting information, with prisoners often resorting to telling their captors what it is they want to hear, in the vague hope of freedom, or in a lot of cases, an end to their suffering. The sad truth of the matter is, Prince Jaehaerys likely just died of natural causes, and should not be seen as surprising given the fate of his siblings. In time, the beheading of the wet nurse and the murder of the family of household knights would be forgotten and overshadowed by even more brutal acts to come. But it did cause much outrage and gossip at court at the time, and for the first time it seems whispers of the king's growing madness was becoming known amongst the small folk of King's Landing. After the death of Prince Jaehaerys, Aerys made no attempt to comfort his broken wife, who once again had lost another babe. Instead, King Aerys chose solitude and fasted for a fortnight, ending when he made a walk of repentance across the city to the Great Sept of Baelor to pray with the High Septon. What happened inside the walls of the Sept is beyond our knowledge. What words of wisdom the gods bestowed upon the king, unknown. But when he returned to the Red Keep, Aerys announced from that day on he would only lie with and bed his lawful wife, in the eyes of God and men, Queen Rhaegar. If what court records and chroniclers say of the time is to be believed, then it seems that Aerys did keep to this vow, never again taking another mistress. From that day on, he seemed to lose all interest in the charms of women altogether, and the king had become a whole new man in the space of a few hours of praying. Given how changeable Aerys was known to be, few believed this latest fad would last, and when Aerys was once again bored and frustrated with his wife, he would fall back into old habits. But it seemed his grace's new fidelity was apparently pleasing the mother above. It must be said, as the following year, in 276 AC, Queen Rhaegar gave birth to the second son they had prayed for, whom they named Viserys. The babe was said to be small, but robust and as beautiful a child as King's Landing had ever seen. Until the babe grew older, however, many at court held their breath, in case this new prince shared the fate of the poor Jaehaerys. Prince Rhaegar was 17 years old when his younger brother was born, which was indeed a large age gap, speaking to the depths of the issues the king and queen had in producing a second living child. But, despite these issues, Prince Rhaegar was said to be everything that could be wanted in an heir apparent. All of Westeros rejoiced to know that at last he had a brother, another Targaryen, to secure the succession in the unfortunate event something ill befell Rhaegar, or if for some reason he could not father heirs of his own. For the first time in decades, the succession did seem secure. Rather than temper the king's madness, the birth of Prince Viserys only seemed to make Aerys more fearful and obsessive. Though the new young princeling seemed healthy enough, the king was terrified lest he suffer the same fate as his brothers. Kingsguard knights were commanded to stand over him day and night, to see that no one touched the boy without the king's express leave. Even the queen herself was forbidden to be alone with the babe. When her milk eventually dried up, Aerys insisting on having his own personal food taster suckle at the teat of the prince's wet nurse to ensure that the woman had not smeared poison on her breast. As gifts for the young prince arrived from the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, the king had them piled in the yard and burned, for fears that some of them might have been enscrolled or cursed. Later that same year, Lord Tywin Lannister, perhaps unwisely, held a great tourney at Lannisport, funded yet again by his own coin in honour of Viserys' birth. May perhaps it was meant to be a gesture towards reconciliation. There, the wealth and power of House Lannister was displayed for all the realm to see. King Aerys at first refused to attend, then relented, but the Queen and Prince Viserys were kept under confinement back at King's Landing. There, seated on his throne amongst hundreds of nobles in the shadow of Casterly Rock, the king cheered lustily as his son, Prince Rhaegar, newly knighted, unhorsed both of Tywin's younger brothers, Tyget and Geryon Lannister, and even overcame the gallant Sir Barristan Selmy before falling in the champion's tilt to the renowned Kingsguard knight, Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Perhaps seeking to gain advantage of his grace's high spirit, Lord Tywin chose that very night to suggest that it was past time the king's heir wed, and produced an heir of his own. He proposed his own daughter, Cersei, as wife to the crown prince. But Aerys II rejected his proposal brusquely, informing Lord Tywin that he was a good and valuable servant, yet a servant nonetheless. Nor did his grace agree to appoint Lord Tywin's son, Jaime, as squire to Prince Rhaegar. That honour he granted instead to the sons of several of his own favourites, men known to be no friends to House Lannister or the Hand. Thus, once again, the divide between the king and his Hand grew ever deeper. By the year 277 AC, it had become very clear to all at court that King Aerys II Targaryen and his unusual behaviour, hyperfixations, changeable personality, and outbursts of anger were much more than just isolated incidents. It was plain to see that the once promising young king, now 33 years of age, was rapidly falling into what some were starting to call madness. The story goes that Aerys lunged into an abyss with no hope of recovery after one single event changed him forever, and even historians look back on it as a fundamental turning point in the history of Westeros, thanks to the demons it unleashed onto the realm. The Defiance of Duskendale. Duskendale was an ancient harbour town, north up the coast of King's Landing, on the shores of Blackwater Bay. Before Aegon's conquest, it had been the main trading hub on the eastern mainland of Westeros, with the petty kings of House Targaryen for centuries becoming rich off trade from across the narrow sea. All of that changed with the formation of King's Landing. This new city became the centre of trade, and while Duskendale did still prosper, not near to the same extent as it once had before. It had once been the seat of the petty kings of House Targaryen during the days of the Hundred Kingdoms, with its young lord in 277 AC, Dennis Targaryen, now struggling to deal with the town's dwindling trade and being pressured by not only rich merchants and townsfolk, but the general smallfolk population of Duskendale. Historians, maesters, lords and smallfolk alike in the years since the Defiance had debated why Lord Targaryen chose the extreme course of action he did, but the most popular theory is that his Myrish wife, Lady Sarala, played at least some part in his decision. Her detractors, of whom there is many, blame her solely for what transpired in that faithful year of 277. The laced serpent, they have named her, poisoned Lord Targaryen against King Aerys II with her pillow talk. But those few who do defend her insist that there is little to no proof to support this claim, with it being baseless speculation, and lay the blame for the folly at Lord Targaryen himself, with the hate directed towards his wife being down to her gender and foreign birth, praying to alien gods. The events of the Lycian Spring and the rise and fall of House Rhaegar during the regency of King Aegon III is often cited as a similar case. Lord Dennis desired to win a charter for the town of Duskendale that would give it more autonomy from the crown itself, in a similar fashion that had been done for Dorne for many years by this point in time. It was this notion that Duskendale should be treated equally to Dorne that started the troubles. In truth, it did not seem that much of a vast demand, as charters akin to this were very common across the narrow sea in the homeland of Lady Sarala, information she surely would have passed on to her lord husband. Yet given that this is Westeros and not the free city of Myr, it is understandable why the king's hand, Lord Tywin Lannister, a hard negotiator at the best of times, firmly and soundly rejected Lord Dennis's request. Objectively, this was the correct decision by the hand, as it may well have set a dangerous precedent with the other large port towns of Westeros like Old Town and White Harbour, or even the island of Driftmark, which had never truly recovered from the damage caused by the Dance of the Dragons. Angered by Lord Tywin's refusal to entertain the idea, Lord Targaryen, with likely the help of his wife, devised a new plan to win his charter that would lower the port fees, tariffs, and allow Duskendale once more to vie for trade with King's Landing. But as history has shown us, this plan was folly and foolish. What became the Defiance of Duskendale began slowly and quietly. Lord Dennis, seeing that King Aerys' erratic behaviour had begun to strain the relationship with his hand, Tywin Lannister, Dennis refused to pay the taxes expected of him. Taking this a step further, he invited the king himself to Duskendale to hear his petition. It is unlikely the king would grant such a request, especially a king like Aerys, who left the running of the realm to his small council. For him, this was a matter of little consequence. That is, until Tywin Lannister advised the king to refuse the invitation in the strongest possible terms, whereupon the king decreed he would accept Lord Dennis's invite and travel to Duskendale on the morrow. He informed Grand Maester Pycelle and the small council that he meant to settle this charter matter himself and bring the defiant Lord Dennis to heel. This was all against the pleading of Tywin and the small council. The king travelled to Duskendale with a small escort led by Sir Gawain Gaunt of the Kingsguard. The invitation was indeed a trap, one the king walked into like a lamb to the slaughter. Aerys was seized with his escort somewhere between King's Landing and Duskendale, with most of the party killed, including Sir Gawain, who died defending his king valiantly. While some at court surely suspected foul play the moment Lord Dennis offered his invitation, the general mood of the court and the wider realm was of shock, soon followed by outrage. More hot-headed members of the court urged a sudden assault upon Duskendale to free Aerys and capture Lord Dennis, dead or alive. for such a brazen attack on the crown. But Duskendale was one of the oldest towns in Westeros, and surrounded by strong high walls. And then there was the Dunfort itself, the ancient seat of House Darkland, to contend with, which overlooked the harbour. Sieging Duskendale would be no easy task, storming the Dunfort even more troublesome. With Aerys in irons, Lord Tywin as Hand of the King was now effectively ruling the Seven Kingdoms. He sent out riders and ravens, gathering forces while commanding the Darklands to give up the king and surrender. Lord Dennis rather sent word that if any attempt was made to attack his walls, he would put Aerys to death. Many in the small council believed this was a bluff, declaring that no son of Westeros would commit such a horrific crime. But the reality is, Lord Dennis could never afford to give up such a valuable hostage by killing him. Regardless, Tywin would not take the chance, and instead, with a large army, moved to surround Duskendale by both land and sea. With Tywin's rural army set outside his walls and his supply chains cut off, Lord Darkland's steel began to falter. He made several efforts to parley, but Tywin refused to entertain him, instead repeating his demands of an unconditional surrender of the town and its castle with the safe release of the king. The defiance lasted for half a year. It is said that inside the walls of Duskendale, the mood began to sour fast as the food stores began to run dry. Yet, huddled in the Dunfort, Lord Dennis was convinced that it was only a matter of time before Tywin weakened and offered him better terms. It is clear that Lord Dennis did not know Tywin Lannister. Instead, the Hand's heart grew harder, and he sent Lord Dennis one final demand for surrender. Should he refuse yet again, Tywin promised he would take the town by storm and put every man and woman and even the children to the sword. There is one legend that Lord Tywin sent this demand with a bard and commanded him to sing the now infamous song The Rains of Castamere for Lord Dennis and his wife as a warning what would befall them should they refuse. The small council were with the Hand outside the walls of Duskendale, with the realm being ruled from Tywin's tent. Several were bold enough to argue against Lord Tywin's plans on the grounds that such an attack would goad Lord Dennis into killing King Aerys. He may or may not, Lord Tywin told them, but if he does, we have a better king right here, wherein Tywin pointed to the young prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Scholars have debated ever since as to Lord Tywin's true intent. Did he believe Lord Darkland would back down, or was he, in truth, willing and perhaps eager to see Aerys die, so Prince Rhaegar might take the Iron Throne? No one will ever know for certain, thanks to the courage of Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard. Sir Barristan offered to enter the town in secret, find his way to the Dunfort, and spirit the king to safety. Selmy had been known as Barristan the Bold since his youth, but this was a boldness that Tywin Lannister felt bordered on madness. Yet, such was his respect for the prowess and courage of Sir Barristan that he gave him 24 hours to attempt this plan before storming Duskendale. The songs of Sir Barristan's daring rescue of the king are numerous, and, for a rarity, the singers hardly had to embolden it. Sir Barristan did indeed scale the walls unseen in the dark of night, using nothing but his bare hands, and he did disguise himself as a hooded beggar as he made his way to the Dunfort. It is also true as well that he managed to scale the walls of the Dunfort, in turn killing a guard on the walkways before he could raise the alarm. Then, by stealth and courage, he found his way to the dungeon where the king was being kept. By the time he had Aerys out of the dungeon, the king's absence had been noted, and a hue and the cry went up, and the true breadth of Sir Barristan's heroism was revealed, for he stood and fought rather than surrender himself or his king. And not only did he fight, but he struck first, taking Lord Darkland's good brother and master-at-arms, Sir Simon Hollard, and a pair of guards unawares, slaying them all, and so avenging the death of his sworn brother, Sir Gawain Gaunt of the Kingsguard, who had been killed at Hollard's hand. He hurried the king to the stables, fighting his way through those who tried to intervene, and the two were able to ride out of the Dunfort before the castle gates could be closed. Then there was a wild ride through the streets of Duskendale, while horns and trumpets sounded the alarm, and a race up to the walls as Lord Tywin's archers attempted to clear it of defenders. With the king escaped and safe, there was nothing left for Lord Darkland save surrender. But it is doubtful he knew the terrible revenge the king intended. When Darkland and his family were presented to him in chains, Aerys demanded their deaths, and not only Darkland's immediate kin, but his uncles and aunts, and even distant kinsmen in Duskendale itself, even his distant kin in the Hollards, were attainted and destroyed. Only Sir Simon Hollard's young nephew Dontus Hollard was spared, and only then because Sir Barristan begged that mercy as a boon, and the king he had saved could not refuse him. As to Lady Soralla, hers was a crueler death. Aerys had the lace serpent's tongue and womanly parts torn out before she was burned alive. The Defiance of Duskendale, that spanned most of the year 277 AC, may have been consigned to the dusty pages of history as an interesting event, if it was not for one thing: the sheer impact it had on King Aerys II, and how it influenced how the events over the next decade would transpire and accumulate into the downfall of House Targaryen. His 6-month captivity at the Dunfort at the hands of Lord Dennis Darklan had shattered the little sanity that Aerys Targaryen still possessed. From then on, the king's madness became unchecked, growing worse with every passing year. It was clear that there was none of the young, promising king who had ascended the Iron Throne all those years ago. The Darklands had dared to lay their hands upon the blood of the dragon, manhandling him, stripping him of his royal finery, and even daring to beat him. After Sir Barristan the Bold daring rescue, King Aerys would no longer allow himself to be touched by anyone, not even his own servants. Therefore his hair and beard were left uncut and unwashed. His hair grew even longer and more tangled as it started to mat. His fingernails grew long and thickened into horrible yellow talons. Aerys forbade any blade in his presence, with the exception of those carried by the sworn brothers of the Kingsguard. But most of all, Aerys' judgment and punishments became even harsher and crueler than they were before. It took several long weeks to return Aerys to King's Landing, given his condition, but once he did, he refused to leave the Red Keep for any reason, and became a virtual prisoner in his castle for the next 4 years, during which time his madness only deepened, and he distrusted those around him even more. Most of all his hand, Tywin Lannister. He even had suspicions of his eldest son and heir, Prince Rhaegar, who he was convinced had conspired with Tywin to have him slain at Duskendale, that they had planned to storm the town walls so Lord Darklan would put the king to death, thus opening the way for Rhaegar to claim the Iron Throne and marry Lord Tywin's daughter, Cersei. He was sure it was only Barristan the Bold's heroic intervention that prevented this. Hoping to prevent supposed plotting like this from ever happening again, King Aerys turned to another of his childhood friends, summoning Lord Steffon Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, to court, and naming him to his small council. The reality is, Steffon had heard the tales of Aerys' growing madness, and knew not to take the king's word at his worth. It also appears that Lord Steffon and Tywin, whom were also friends, aligned when it came to many matters. In the year 278 AC, the king sent Lord Steffon across the narrow sea to the city of Volantis to find a suitable bride for his son and heir, Prince Rhaegar. Not wishing a Westerosi bride, fearing they could not be trusted, he wanted Steffon to find a maid of noble birth and of an old Valyrian bloodline. This job would normally be entrusted to the Hand, so Aerys giving it to Lord Steffon speaks to how little he now trusted Tywin. The very fact Prince Rhaegar had no involvement in the matchmaking process also speaks volumes. There were some rumours from this time that suggested that Aerys planned to name Steffon the Hand of the King if he succeeded in his mission, removing Tywin for office and arresting him for high treason. There were many wishing to gain Aerys' favour, who supported this idea and may have pushed him in that direction. Like with much of Targaryen history, there was to be a twist of fate, as the gods clearly had other notions. Steffon Baratheon's mission ended in failure, not managing to find a bride who matched the king's list of requirements. On the voyage home from Volantis, his ship was caught in a storm and sank in the waters of Shipbreaker Bay, in the sight of Storm's End and Steffon's young sons, Robert, Stannis and Renly, who looked on helpless. Both Steffon, his wife and the whole crew of the ship were killed. One did survive, however, a fool Steffon had brought back from Volantis for his children. He was found washed up on a nearby beach, but it is said the trauma of the event broke the fool's mind, causing him to forever speak in riddles. When the word of the tragedy reached King's Landing, Aerys flew into a blind rage, and had somehow come to the conclusion that Tywin Lannister had learned of Aerys' plans to name Steffon Hand, and arranged for his murder. He told Grand Maester Pycelle, "If I dismiss him as Hand, he will have me killed too." Could Tywin have really caused the death of Steffon? No. is unlikely given the nature of Shipbreaker Bay. It's even fair to question if Tywin, a man of whom loyalty is a paramount trait, would have even wanted to murder his own friend. In the years that followed, the king's madness deepened. Though Tywin Lannister continued his hand, King Aerys no longer met with him, save in the presence of all 7 of the Kingsguard. Convinced that the small folk and lords were plotting against his life, and fearing that even Queen Rhaegar and Prince Rhaegar might be part of these plots, he reached across the narrow sea to the free city of Pentos and imported a eunuch, only known as Varys, to serve as a spy master. Aerys' logic was that only a man without friends, family, or ties to Westeros could be trusted. Varys soon became known as the Spider by the small folk of Westeros, and used the crown's gold to set up a vast web of informants, like the realm had never seen before. For the rest of Aerys' reign, Varys would always be seen crouched at the king's side, whispering into his ear. In the wake of Duskendale, the king also began to display signs of ever-increasing obsession with wildfire, similar to that which had haunted several of his forebearers, most notably Aerion Brightflame, who had drunk wildfire, thinking it might turn him into a living dragon. Lord Darkling would never have dared to defy him if he had been a dragon rider, Aerys reasoned. His attempts to bring forth dragons from eggs found in the depths of Dragonstone, some so old they had turned to stone, yielded naught but frustration. Aerys turned to the wisdom of the ancient guild of alchemists, who knew the secret of producing the volatile jade-green substance known as wildfire, said to be a close cousin to dragonflame. The pyromancers became a regular fixture at court as the king's fascination with wildfire grew. By 280 AC, King Aerys II had taken to burning traitors, murderers and plotters, rather than hanging them or beheading them. The king seemed to take great pleasure in these fiery executions, which were presided over by Wisdom Razat, the Grand Master of the Guild of Alchemists. By the year 280 AC, as new members of the King Aerys' court became entrenched, the likes of Wisdom Razat, of the Archmaesters Guild, and Varys the Spider, whom both had been given honorary titles as lords and seats on the small council. Even to the common folk of King's Landing, King Aerys' ever-growing madness had become unmistakable and undeniable. From the sands of dawn to the cold of the wall, referring to King Aerys as simply the Mad King became commonplace. The new nickname was not just reserved to the small folk, but even lords both petty and high, with it even reaching across the narrow sea to the free cities. No matter the events to come, Aerys' legacy had now been cemented. He would forever be known as the Mad King. There were other nicknames as well that, while stuck, did not reach the popularity of the Mad King. The people of King's Landing began to call Aerys King Scab for the countless times that he had cut himself upon the Iron Throne. Many already had decided that omen meant that, like Rhaenyra Targaryen and Maegor the Cruel before him, the Iron Throne had now rejected Aerys. As the influence of Lord Varys the Spider and his network of informants grew, always listening, always whispering, it became very dangerous to voice any of these sentiments, or thus share the same fate as Sir Ilyn Payne, who had lost his tongue for a perceived insult to Aerys. If things had become tense in King's Landing with the King's madness, it was 10 times worse inside the walls of the Red Keep itself. At the court of the Mad King, there was a thick underlying atmosphere of tension, as lords and courtiers, whom before had been fast friends, began to mistrust one another, fearing the other could be one of the Spider's informants. Even within the royal family itself, decade-old personal issues festered, as King Aerys became ever more estranged from his own son and heir, Prince Rhaegar, with no semblance of respect or trust left. The truth is, despite Aerys' dislike for his own son, Prince Rhaegar for the most part is all you could have wanted in an heir apparent. It is said that he had deep purple eyes, long elegant fingers, and was taller than his younger brother Viserys would be in his adulthood. Rhaegar's hair had the traditional silver blonde of House Targaryen. The prince was well loved by the people of the Seven Kingdoms during his lifetime, and still fondly remembered to this day. He was an intelligent young man who excelled at anything he wished to put his mind to, and grew to be a great knight and skilled musician. The latter, however, he held preference to. Men said Rhaegar loved his silver-stringed harp more than he loved his lance. It has also been noted by men such as Jorah Mormont, the former lord of Bear Island, that Rhaegar was valiant, honourable, and noble, while Barristan Selmy the Kingsguard has been known to call him determined, deliberate, dutiful, and single-minded. The Crown Prince was said to have been uninterested in the play of other children as a boy, and bookish to a fault. He learnt to read at such an early age that people jested that his mother, Rhaegar, had swallowed books and candles during her pregnancy. It was clear from his valiant performance at the Great Tourney at Lannisport in 276 AC that the small folk had great love for the Crown Prince, something that would only stoke Aerys' paranoia further. Rhaegar was also described as a melancholy young man and often spent time in the burned ruins of Summerhall, the place of his birth, spending hours sitting alone in the ruin with only his harp. After each visit, he would return with a new song of such beauty it could reduce women to tears, or so several testimonies state. There are some who have suggested that Rhaegar had shown little interest in women in his youth, but like with these matters, we cannot say for sure, and only speculate. But early in the year 279 AC, after the failure and tragedy of Stephen Baratheon's hunt in Essos for a bride for the prince, and another extensive long search in the months after, a bride was finally found for the 20-year-old Prince Rhaegar, whom was formerly betrothed to Elia Martell, herself 22 years of age. While Elia met nearly none of Aerys' long list of specifications for a bride he had given Stephen Baratheon, he did consent to the match. Some have suggested that Aerys briefly came to his senses and realised no perfect bride could be found, while some attribute this softening of approach to the likes of Lord Varys, or maybe perhaps even Tywin Lannister. Elia was the younger sister of the Prince of Dorne, Doran Martell. Very few of the lords at court knew much of Elia, but it is said that she was beautiful, slender, with dark eyes and a flat chest. From what was known of her at the time, she had frequent issues with her health, having been born one moon too early. Thus she did not travel much in her youth to the other kingdoms of Westeros, which is why she is such an unknown quantity for many at court. Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard is known to have said of Elia that she was gentle, good and gracious, but very frail. He also said that she was kind and clever, with a good wit. While not obvious choice to be Rhaegar's one-day future queen, other than her health, few could complain about the match, especially if it would once again bring the Crown and Dorne closer together. They were wed the following year, early in 280 AC, in a lavish ceremony at the Great Sept of Baelor in King's Landing, as the small folk lined the streets to catch a glimpse of their future king and queen. It was said to be a jubilant day, given the love the small folk held for Prince Rhaegar. King Aerys did not attend the wedding, which in truth surprised no one at court, even Prince Rhaegar himself. Most would take such a move as a slight, but the common line of thought is that if Aerys had attended, it would have cast a gloomy shadow over the occasion. It is said that Aerys told his small council that he feared someone might use the opportunity to make an attempt on his life, even if he had all 7 of his Kingsguard about his person to protect him. He also forbade his second son Viserys from attending the wedding. It is believed at this early stage, King Aerys had already begun to consider disinheriting Rhaegar and naming Viserys his heir, seeing the then 4-year-old boy as much less of a threat to his rule than his beloved first son. We cannot know if this is true, but given the events over the next few years, it would certainly fit with Aerys' known fixations of this time. Prince Rhaegar and his new wife Elia chose to take up residence on Dragonstone, rather than stay at court in the Red Keep under the eyes of his suspicious father. But this in itself caused rumours to fly fast up and down the 7 kingdoms. There were some who claimed that Prince Rhaegar, seeing the danger to the realm of his father's madness, planned to depose him and seize the Iron Throne himself. Some took this even further by claiming Rhaegar was secretly planning an open rebellion should his father refuse to step aside, with Tywin Lannister supporting, backing and funding the prince. On the other side, rumours were also growing that the Mad King was too planning his own action against Prince Rhaegar by disinheriting him and naming the 4-year-old Viserys as heir and Prince of Dragonstone in his place. Nor did the birth of Aerys' first grandchild soften his resolve in any way. In 280 AC on Dragonstone, Elia Martell gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Rhaenys. When Prince Rhaegar returned to King's Landing to present the babe at court to his own mother and father, Aerys publicly refused to touch or hold Rhaenys, and in fact complained that she smelt Dornish. In truth, it is true that Princess Rhaenys did take after her mother and her Dornish look of House Martell, with a darker skin complexion and lacking the traditional silver hair of a Targaryen. While in days gone by, in the time before the Dance of the Dragons, un-Valyrian-looking Targaryens were a rare thing, given how common incestuous marriages within the family were. But for the last century, there have been countless of the blood of the dragon born lacking traditional Valyrian qualities. But it did not make them, including Princess Rhaenys, any less Targaryen. From what little we know of Princess Rhaenys, it is said that she was a happy child who loved the many cats of the Red Keep, brought in to replace the rat catchers by Otto Hightower after the infamous blood and cheese incident during the Dance of the Dragons. She had a kitten of her own that she took everywhere with her. Rhaenys liked to pretend her kitten, she named Balerion, was actually the dragon, Balerion the Black Dread.
Even as the chaotic relationship between Aerys II and his eldest son, Prince Rhaegar, continued to fester, with the birth of Rhaegar's first child doing very little to bridge the divide. One man sat at the head of the small council table, steadying the realm for any turbulence the fiery nature of the blood of the dragon caused. We are, of course, talking about the King's Hand, Tywin Lannister, whom even with Aerys' attempts to make his job as hard as possible, was still one of the best hands the realm has ever seen, despite the efforts of the king. Grand Maester Pycelle, in his letters to the Citadel, wrote of Tywin the following: Lord Tywin looms as large as Casterly Rock, and no king has ever had a more diligent or capable hand and servant. While we must admit that given the context of events to come, the Grand Maester did of course hold a bias towards Tywin, even Tywin's harshest critics could hardly disagree with Pycelle's statement. With the tragic death of Lord Steffon Baratheon and his wife in the waters of Shipbreaker Bay, the only other man perhaps capable of taking Tywin's responsibilities of hand, Lord Tywin now found his place at court even more secure than it was before. Hence why Steffon's death only fueled Aerys' suspicions of Tywin further. Tywin even became so confident that in 278 AC he decided to bring his beautiful young daughter Cersei to court. It was believed by many at the time that this was to try and find a worthy match for his 12-year-old daughter, but every match that was proposed to Tywin was swiftly rejected. It is believed, despite the marriage of Prince Rhaegar to Elia Martell, that Tywin still hoped for a Targaryen match and had eyes set on the king's second son, Prince Viserys, whom would have been 2 years of age at the time. Therefore, it has been speculated that Tywin foresaw, given how frail Elia was known to be, that she may sadly have died in childbirth, and thus Rhaegar need a new wife. Even as a young girl, Cersei was said to be strikingly beautiful, and an image of her mother, with the golden hair and emerald green eyes of House Lannister. She and her twin brother Jaime were said to look so alike as children that not even Tywin could tell the two apart. But as the pair matured, this likeness slowly lessened. Those who knew her from these early days at court have noted that even then, Cersei was politically astute, and disliked being excluded from things due to her gender, and resented the customs and conventions placed on her as a result. There are some who might have gone as far to have said that Cersei was the female version of her Lord Father, something that became apparent as the young girl began to attend court events, as court life did suit her well, and that she had developed a fondness for Arbor Gold, often served at feasts. Even at the age of 12, Cersei's deep-rooted hatred for her younger brother Tyrion Lannister was well known, as she blamed the malformed babe for her mother's untimely death. There is one tale that suggests that shortly after her mother's death, and while still in mourning, the Princess of Dawn arrived at Casterly Rock with her 2 youngest children, the future bride of Rhaegar, Elia, and her brother, Oberyn Martell. Despite the fact that her younger brother was kept well out of sight during the visit, Cersei promised to show him to the Martell children. It is said that she sent the babe's wet nurse away, then undid Tyrion's swaddling cloths to better show his dwarfism. When Oberyn Martell seemed disappointed at the supposed monster, Cersei pointed out that he had killed her mother and began to twist the babe's private parts while he screamed, only to be found and stopped by her brother Jaime. How much of this tale can be true is debated, but what we can say is even from this young age, Cersei Lannister was a woman not easily trifled with. The tension between King Aerys II and his hand came to a head in 281 AC with the death of the Kingsguard knight Harling Grandison, who passed away in his sleep. With that sudden and uneasy accord between hand and the king snapped once and for all when Aerys offered the white cloak to Tywin's eldest son and heir, Sir Jaime Lannister. At 15 years of age at the time, he was already a knight an honour he'd received from the hand of the legendary Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, whom even today many consider the realm's most chivalrous and greatest warrior. Jaime had won his knighthood during Sir Arthur's campaign against the outlaw band known as the Kingswood Brotherhood. It is said he saved the life of Lord Sumner Cratecaw from an outlaw known as Big Belly Ben, and then crossed swords with the well-known psychotic Smiling Knight. He managed to fend off the knight in an extended exchange before Sir Arthur Dayne intervened and continued the fight. The duel was long and paused when the Smiling Knight's sword was notched, with the ever-honourable Arthur allowing him to take up a new blade. It is said that the Smiling Knight told Dayne that it was his famous sword Dawn he truly desired, with this fallen knight slain by that very blade moments later. For his valour, Sir Arthur knighted young Jaime, and no man present could doubt his skill at arms. For many lords, it would be seen as an honour if their son was chosen to join the White Cloaks, but that was not the case with Tywin Lannister. Jaime was his heir, and with Jaime carried the hopes and future of House Lannister. This issue was even more prominent, given Tywin's second son was a malformed dwarf. To make matters worse, at the time, Tywin had been on the verge of agreeing an advantageous marriage pact for Jaime to marry the younger daughter of Lord Hoster Tully, Lysa. Thus, with the timing of Aerys' decree to name Jaime to the Kingsguard was damaging for Tywin on multiple levels. In a single stroke, King Aerys had deprived Lord Tywin of his chosen heir and made him look a fool for all the lords of the realm. The court records of Grandmaster Pycelle tell us that when Aerys announced Sir Jaime's appointment from atop the Iron Throne, Lord Tywin went to one knee and thanked the king for the great honour shown to him and his house. Then, pleading illness, Lord Tywin asked to take his leave of King's Landing and retire as Hand of the King. King Aerys was all too pleased to oblige him, and thus Lord Tywin surrendered his chain of office and retired from court with immediate effect, returning to his seat of Casterly Rock with his daughter Cersei. Aerys replaced Tywin as Hand with Lord Owen Merryweather, an aged and amiable lickspittle and flatterer, famed for laughing loudest at the king's jests, no matter how poor or feeble they were. Henceforth, his grace told Pycelle, the realm would know for certainty that the man who wore the crown also ruled the Seven Kingdoms. Aerys Targaryen and Tywin Lannister had met as young boys, had fought and bled together in the War of the Ninepenny Kings, and had ruled the Seven Kingdoms together for close to 20 years. But in 281, this long partnership, which had proven so fruitful to the realm, came to a bitter end. Shortly thereafter, Lord Walter Went announced plans for a great tourney to be held at his seat of Harrenhal to celebrate his maiden daughter's name day. King Aerys II chose this event for the formal investiture of Sir Jaime Lannister as a Kingsguard Knight, thus setting in motion the events that would end the Mad King's reign and write an end to the long rule of House Targaryen in the Seven Kingdoms. Over the centuries of the Targaryen rule of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros, many key dates jump out as important to the histories, but arguably, in regards to the recent history, 281 AC marks a seismic turning point for House Targaryen and Westeros as a whole. The maesters and common men alike have come to call 281 AC the year of the false spring. Winter held its icy grip on the land for near 2 years, but now it seemed the snows were starting to thaw, the woods were becoming green again, and the dark days finally growing ever longer and brighter. The white raven of the citadel that marks the changing of the seasons had not yet flown from Old Town, but the word around the citadel and among the maesters up and down Westeros was winter was finally at its end. As winters go, it wasn't a particularly harsh or brutal one. Even being only 2 years was not considered out of the ordinary. But even so, the lords and commons alike welcomed the warmth of spring and the summer to follow. As these warm winds blew from the south, lords and knights from throughout the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros made their way towards the cursed ruin of Harrenhal on the shores of the God's Eye to compete in Lord Went's great tourney, which was promised to be the largest and most magnificent competition since the time of King Aegon V. Unlike much of history, where we in truth know very little of what actually occurred, this is certainly not the case with what became known as the Tourney of Harrenhal. We in fact know a surprising amount about it, thanks to the words set down by the scores of chroniclers, lords and knights who were present The citadel in Old Town is in possession of countless letters sent between maesters who attended the events, meaning we can take a look at the tourney in detail from many different points of view. Thanks to the amount of sources, it is easier to establish fact and fiction, wherein a majority of sources agree or disagree. Yet, despite how well recorded the Great Tourney was, there is still so much we don't know, and sadly we will never know, as even while the great knights of the age fought in the lists, other more dangerous games were being played in the ruined halls of Harren and the tents and pavilions of the lords assembled. Many tales have emerged from Lord Went's famous tourney, tales of plots and conspiracies, betrayals and rebellion, infidelities, secrets and mysteries. The truth of what occurred in these dark corners are known only to a few, many of whom have long since died, and now will forever hold their tongues. Thus, when discussing the events of this great tourney, it is vital we take much care to try and separate fact from fiction the best we can, and draw a clear line between what is objectively known, what is suspected, believed or rumoured to have happened. The tourney was first announced by Lord Walter Went, the Lord of Harrenhal, late in the year 280 AC, not long after a visit from his younger brother, Sir Oswell Went, a knight of the Kingsguard of Aerys II. That the tourney would be one like no other before it was clear from the first. The prizes being offered were thrice as large as the ones offered at the tourney in Lannisport, held by Tywin Lannister in the year 272 AC, in celebration of King Aerys being on the Iron Throne for 10 years. Many in fact wondered how on earth Lord Went could outspend the great Tywin Lannister with all the gold and Casterly Rock. Most took this simply as an attempt by Lord Went to outdo the former hand and demonstrate the wealth and splendour of his house. There were those, however, who believed this was no more than a ruse, and Lord Went no more than a cat's paw. His lordship lacked the funds to pay such magnificent prizes, they argued. Someone else must surely have stood behind him, someone who did not lack for gold, but preferred to remain in the shadows, whilst allowing the Lord of Harrenhal to claim the glory for hosting this magnificent event. We have no shred of evidence that such a shadow host did ever exist, but the notion was widely believed at the time, and remains so today. But if indeed there was a shadow host, who was he? And why did he choose to keep his role a secret? A dozen names have been put forward over the years, but only one truly seems compelling. Rhaegar Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone, with Tywin Lannister also closely associated with the claim as well. If the speculative tale is to be believed, it was Prince Rhaegar who urged Lord Walter to hold his tourney, using Lord Walter's Kingsguard brother Sir Oswell as an intermediary. Rhaegar would provide Walter with the gold to offer such splendid prizes, in order to bring as many lords and knights to Harrenhal as possible. It is widely believed today that the prince had no interest or intent for the great tourney to really be that, a tourney, but rather he was intent on gathering the great lords of Westeros in one place, in what would amount to an informal and unofficial great council, in order to discuss ways and a means of dealing with the growing madness of his father, King Aerys II, with the likely option being a regency, with either Rhaegar or Lord Tywin Lannister likely taking the role, or perhaps the use of a regency council, as once was done for King Aegon III in his minority, with the more extreme proposed outcome, a forced abdication of King Aerys for the good of the realm, which has been argued over the years would have been an act of rebellion, and could very well have started another Targaryen civil war, should Rhaegar not get enough lords to back his plan. If indeed this was the purpose behind the tourney, it was a perilous game that Rhaegar Targaryen was playing. Though few doubted that Aerys had taken leave of his senses, many still had good reason to oppose his removal from the Iron Throne, for certain courtiers and councillors had gained great wealth and power through the king, and knew they stood to lose all should Prince Rhaegar come to power. The Mad King could be savagely cruel, as seen most plainly when he burnt those who he perceived to be his enemies, but he could also be extravagant, showering men who pleased him with honours, offices and lands. The lick-spittle lords who surrounded Aerys II had gained much and more from the king's madness, eagerly seized upon any opportunity to speak ill of Prince Rhaegar and inflame the father's suspicions of the son. Chief amongst the Mad King's supporters were the three lords of his small council, Carlton Chalstead, the Master of Coin, Lucerys Velaryon, the Master of Ships, and Sir Simon Staunton, Master of Laws. The eunuch Varys, the Master of Whisperers, and Wisdom Razat, Grand Master of the Guild of Alchemists, also enjoyed the king's trust and a seat on the council. Prince Rhaegar's support came from the younger men at court, including the likes of Lord John Connington, Sir Miles Mouton of Maidenpool, and Sir Richard Lonmouth. The Dornishmen who had come to court with Princess Elia Martell were also in the prince's confidence as well. In particular, Lewin Martell, Elia's uncle and sworn brother of the Kingsguard. But the most formidable of Rhaegar's friends and allies in King's Landing surely must have been Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. To Grand Maester Pycelle and Lord Owen Merryweather, the king's hand fell the unenviable task of keeping the peace between these factions, even as their rivalries grew even more venomous. In letters to the Citadel, Pycelle wrote that the divisions within the Red Keep reminded him uncomfortably of the situation before the Dance of the Dragons a century before, where the enmity between Queen Alicent and Princess Rhaenyra had split the realm in two to grievous cost. A similar bloody conflict might await the Seven Kingdoms once again, he warned, unless some accord could be reached that would satisfy both Prince Rhaegar's supporters and the king's. Had any whiff of proof come into their hands to show that Prince Rhaegar was in fact conspiring against his father, King Aerys' loyalists would most certainly have used it to bring about the prince's downfall. Indeed, certain of the king's men had even gone as far to suggest that Aerys should disinherit his disloyal son and name his younger brother heir to the Iron Throne instead. Prince Viserys was but 7 years of age, and his eventual succession would certainly mean a regency wherein they themselves would rule as regents. Was this grand tourney at Harrenhal some plot by Prince Rhaegar to call a great council? Did Tywin Lannister play some part? It is not likely we will ever know the true answer, but all we can say for sure is there were men within the king's court, proof or not, that believed this may have been Rhaegar's intent, which in itself helped guide House Targaryen on the path to its doom. As the date of Lord Walter Went's grand tourney at Harrenhal grew ever closer, tensions and suspicions only grew within the walls of the Red Keep. King Aerys II, by this time, was now deep into his madness, with his paranoia only getting worse as his small council and spy masters filled his ears with tales of Prince Rhaegar and the rumours that he was the mastermind of this great tourney, which he wished to become an impromptu great council he would use to depose his father's rule. As we have already discussed, there may have been some legitimate evidence that suggests this was in fact Prince Rhaegar's plan, but in truth, none of this really matters, as even the simple suspicion of Rhaegar, true or not, was enough proof for Aerys. Lord Carlton Chalstead urged Aerys to put an end to this tourney one way or another, with Lord Staunton even going as far as to suggest that he should outlaw all tourneys in Westeros to prevent them from becoming co-opted into rebellious gatherings by the king's enemies. The issue for Aerys was, tourneys and events of their like were widely popular among the small folk. Lord Merryweather warned the king that such a ban on tourneys would only serve to make Aerys even more unpopular amongst the commons. Thus, the king made a very unexpected decision. For the first time since the Defiance of Duskendale, he would leave the safety of the Red Keep. King Aerys would attend this great tourney. It may have been Aerys' flawed logic that if he himself were present, then his enemies would surely not have the gall to conspire against him right under his very nose. The letters of Grand Maester Pycelle tell us that Aerys hoped that his presence at such an event would win him back the love of his lords and small folk. If this was truly King Aerys' intent, we will never know, but regardless, his very presence at this tourney was a grievous miscalculation, one a man with more self-awareness would not have made. While yes, the presence of the king himself at a tourney would only serve to make it grander and more prestigious than it already was, drawing lords and knights from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Many of those who attended had never seen the king in person, and those who had saw him many years ago when Aerys was still that promising young man, now lost to time and madness.
They were shocked and appalled when they saw what had become of their monarch. His long, thick yellow fingernails starting to curl inward, his beard crusty and tangled, his once proud silver Valyrian hair unwashed, matted, almost the same colour as his fingernails. Even to look at the king, you would see a man not in his right mind. In the presence of his son, Prince Rhaegar, a perfect example of the blood of old Valyria, it only made the king's condition hit harder for many. But it was not the look of the king that spoke volumes. His behaviour was clearly not that of a sane man. Aerys could go from mirth, jesting with his lickspittles one moment, to melancholy and rage in the blink of an eye. Of the many accounts of the tourney of Harrenhal that exist to us, each and every one speaks of King Aerys' hysterical laughter, long silences, bouts of weeping, and then sudden rages. To those who had any recent interaction or knowledge of the king, this was of no surprise, but for many, this was a new and shocking reality. King Aerys had become suspicious of all, centered around his son and heir, Prince Rhaegar, his host, Lord Walter Went, and even suspicious of every lord and knight who dared to even attend what he saw as his traitor's tourney, and somehow, confusingly, he even suspected those who did not attend at all, notably Tywin Lannister, his former hand and best friend, whom chose to stay at Casterly Rock, a man who, along with Prince Rhaegar, Aerys feared was the mastermind behind the supposed scheme to usurp him. At the tourney's opening ceremony, King Aerys made a great public show of Sir Jaime Lannister's investiture into the sworn brotherhood of the Kingsguard. The young knight said his vow in the king's royal pavilion, kneeling on one knee in his new gleaming white armour, as half the lords of the realm looked on. When Lord Commander Sir Gerald Hightower raised him up, he clasped a white cloak around the young knight's shoulders. A roar went up from the crowd, as by now word of Sir Jaime's actions against the Kingswood Brotherhood had become a common story amongst the lords and small folk. He was now admired for his courage, gallantry, and his prowess with a sword, with many believing the only man who could possibly best this young knight was Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning himself. Though Tywin Lannister did not attend the tourney at Harrenhal himself, there were countless men there to represent him from among his lord's bannermen, who had brought with them hundreds of knights, as they raised a lusty cheer for the newest and youngest member of the sworn brotherhood of the Kingsguard. At this time, King Aerys was pleased with his choice of appointing Sir Jaime, given how beloved he was among the masses, and the damage it had done to Tywin Lannister. But this soon turned in to the king believing that these cheers were in fact for him, that he had won back the love and respect of his small folk and lords. Only a few hours after Sir Jaime had been sworn in, however, did King Aerys begin to nurse grave doubts about his new protector. It is said there were members of his own small council who fanned the flames of these doubts. It was King Aerys' intent that in naming Sir Jaime to the Kingsguard, that he was wounding and humbling his old friend Tywin Lannister. Through the insights of Grand Maester Pycelle after the fact, Aerys only now blatantly realised he would henceforth have Tywin Lannister's own son beside him day and night, with sword in hand. It would be a very easy thing for the young knight, under orders of his father and a promise of a pardon from Prince Rhaegar, to end the king's life. It's hard to really know if there was any truth to the king's ramblings. Yes, Sir Jaime very well had easy access to the king and could potentially assassinate him with ease. But the question we have to ask here is a simple one. Would Tywin Lannister be happy to risk the life of his own son in order to seek petty vengeance? There is a high chance that even if promises were made of a hypothetical pardon, Jaime would never have left the room he had killed the king, let alone remain alive long enough as a prisoner of the small council. On balance, Aerys' fears seem unlikely, but much like most of the political intrigue of this time, we can never really know for sure. Very simply, this idea frightened the king so badly that he could hardly eat at that night's grand feast in Harrenhal's enormous great hall. According to Grand Maester Pycelle, Aerys summoned Sir Jaime to attend him while squatting over his chamber pot, and commanded him to return to King's Landing that very night to serve as a new protector to Queen Rhaella and Prince Viserys, who had not accompanied the king to Harrenhal. It is said the Lord Commander, Gerald Hightower, offered to go in Jaime's place, but Aerys refused him firmly. For Jaime Lannister, a brilliant young knight who had no doubt hoped to distinguish himself in this grand tourney, would have been bitterly disappointed at the command of his king. But Sir Jaime stayed true to his new vow and set off to the Red Keep at once with no hesitation or complaint, and played no further part in the tourney at Harrenhal, save maybe in the mind of the Mad King. But the king's presence was only one part of this great tourney, and events were transpiring among the pavilions of the Lords assembled that would forever change Westeros and the fate of House Targaryen forever. From an outside perspective, it may seem like the tourney at Harrenhal in the year 281 AC lasted months. In truth, it did take weeks for all of the lords and knights to assemble at Harren's great ruin, and even when the tourney was at its close, it still took several weeks for those same lords to disperse back to their own lands. Comparisons were rightly made to the Great Council of 101 AC, wherein technically it only lasted a few days, but in reality took weeks before and after the council itself, given the sheer number of lords involved. So, while it may seem the tourney at Harrenhal lasted weeks, the event itself was only 7 days long, as the finest knights and noblest of lords of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros contended with lance and sword in the shadow of the towering walls of Harren's ruin. The victors and the vanquished alike gathered in the castle's cavernous hall of 100 hearths for feasting and celebration. Countless songs are sung and stories told of those days and nights beside the God's Eye. It's hard to know which are true and which are fables, but some of them certainly were true. To recall each and every one of them, list every duel, every jape, is far outside the context of our tale of King Aerys II Targaryen, his madness, and the downfall of House Targaryen, a task that should be left to the singers. But there are, in fact, 2 key events that should not be passed over when recounting the histories, for they would indeed prove to have unfathomable consequences. The first of these tales is the appearance of a mystery knight. Now, mystery knights in themselves are not all that uncommon a sight at tourneys. However, this one at Harrenhal is much more of note due to the impact they left in their wake. The knight seemed to be a slight young man in ill-fitting armour, clearly not made to fit him. His device was a carved white weirwood tree, its features twisted in mirth. The Knight of the Laughing Tree, as the challenger became known, managed to unhorse 3 men in successive tilts, to the delight of the common folk. But King Aerys II, often a suspicious man by nature, was not a man to take joy in mysteries. His Grace became convinced that the tree on the Mystery Knight's shield was laughing at him, and with no more proof than that, he decided the Mystery Knight was in fact Jaime Lannister, his newest Kingsguard knight, who had defied Aerys' orders for him to guard Queen Rhaegar and Prince Viserys in King's Landing, returning back to Harrenhal to take part in the tourney as a mystery knight. The king proclaimed this to every man or serving girl who dared to enter his vicinity. The king became most wroth the more he fell into his wine, and he could not be reasoned with by his hand or the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower. Aerys thus commanded his own knights to defeat the Knight of the Laughing Tree when jousting resumed the next morning, so this treacherous knight who mocked him might be unmasked and exposed for all at Harrenhal to see. But there was a curious twist in this tale. As the sun rose the next morning and the knights made their way to the lists, the Knight of the Laughing Tree was nowhere to be found. They had vanished during the night, never to be seen or heard of again. In this, King Aerys found new reasons to cry conspiracy, taking this ill omen to mean someone close to him, who knew of his plans to have the knight exposed, had given him a warning. Even today, people wonder who this mystery knight was, and what their aim in entering the lists entailed. There has been much speculation as to the identity of the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and what their motivation was. There are some who suggested that this knight must have been northern, or perhaps a member of House Blackwood of the Riverlands, given the weirwood imagery used in the Mystery Knight's arms. But there is a very little known story among the reclusive Crannog men in the Neck that offers a version of events that, while indeed makes an interesting story, is just that, as far as we know, a story. It is said that a Crannog man, in some versions of the tale, a young Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch, attended the tourney and found himself being accosted and bullied by 3 squires around the ages of 15 years old. While this Crannog man, perhaps Howland as we will use in this telling, was already a grown man, but given his small stature of the Crannog men, these boys were all much larger than him. The only weapon he carried was a small 3-pronged spear meant for hunting frogs. The boys easily snatched the spear away, with Howland thrown harshly into the ground. His assailants beat and mocked him savagely. But help did arrive for the Crannog man in the form of Lyanna Stark, the maiden daughter of Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell, whom House Reed is sworn to. The young girl is said to have shouted at the boys and fought the attackers off with blunted tawny swords, scattering them back to their masters. Howland was wounded in the attack, so Lyanna took him back to her family's tent, where she cleaned his wounds and bound them with fresh linen. There, the Crannog man was introduced to Lyanna's brothers, Brandon Stark, the heir to Winterfell, known as the Wild Wolf, Eddard Stark, the Quiet Wolf, and Benjen, the pup. The same evening, Lyanna persuaded Howland to attend the feast marking the start of the tourney, insisting that he was highborn and had as much right to be there as anyone present to attend. Benjen is said to have found the small man some suitable clothing. Within the great hall of Harrenhal, he ate and he drank with the young Starks, as well as members of House Dustin, Hornwood, Mormont, and Manderley. Unlike the rest of this tale of the Crannog man, for this great feast we have more sources who were present. It is known that during the festivities, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen himself, a notably skilled musician, performed a sad and beautiful song that made the women present weep, including Lyanna Stark. When her brother Benjen teased her for this, she upturned a flagon of wine on his head. Present at this feast was Lord Robert Baratheon, who had engaged many of those present in drinking contests, which the future king clearly would win. It is said that Howland's attention was on a Shara Dane, a maid of House Dane with striking purple eyes, whom was at the tourney as a companion to Prince Rhaegar's wife, Elia Martell. Ashara is said to have danced with several lords and knights, first a member of the Kingsguard, whose identity differs from source to source, with some suggesting it was Barristan Selmy, while others her brother, Sir Arthur Dane. She then danced with Oberyn Martell, Elia's elder brother. Third, Lord John Connington, a reported close friend and confidant of Rhaegar Targaryen. And lastly, Eddard Stark, a dance that would become the source of many rumours for years to come, given the sad fate that would befall Ashara. As the night went on, and more wine was drunk, both Howland and Lyanna recognised the 3 bully squires who had assaulted the Crannog man. One served House Hague, one served House Blount, and the last boy served the Knight of House Frey. Lyanna pointed them out to her brothers. Benjen offered to find the Crannog man a horse and armour in order to avenge himself, but he failed to reply, torn with indecision. His pride demanded vengeance, but he was afraid of losing and making a fool of himself and his people, thus bringing them much shame in the process. He was no knight, and was not used to horses and lances. Before going to sleep at the tent of Eddard, as the Quiet Wolf had offered him hospitality, he prayed to the old gods. During the first 2 days of the tourney, the knights of House Hague, Blount, and Frey each won their places among the champions in the lists. It was late in that afternoon, in the second day, the mystery knight of short stature appeared in the lists, the Knight of the Laughing Tree. The mystery knight challenged and defeated all 3 of the previous knights, whose squires had bullied Howland, when in custody over their horses and armour. None of them were particularly popular, so the small folk cheered for this mysterious Knight of the Laughing Tree. When the defeated trio sought to ransom back their former property, the knight declared on his terms they ought to teach their rude squires honour. It is said, despite his small stature, the knight's voice boomed through his helm. The trio proceeded to chastise their squires sharply, and vengeance for Howland was met. As we have discussed, the Mystery Knight attracted the unwanted attention of King Aerys II. Robert Baratheon and Richard Lonmouth were determined to unmask him, while King Aerys was certain that the man was his enemy. Despite a search that went throughout the night, the Knight of the Laughing Tree was not found. The king became angered by this, certain that someone close to him had given the warning to the traitor who would not show his face. An angry Aerys sent men, including Prince Rhaegar, to search for the vanished knight, but only his shield could be found abandoned in a tree. The tale of Howland Reed, if it is indeed the tale of Howland, and not another Crannog man, gives us more insight into the motivations of the Knight of the Laughing Tree, and does confirm for the most part that this mystery knight had no ill intention against the king, but rather seeking justice for the wrongs of the ill-mannered squires. Who was this mystery knight? Was it Jaime Lannister, as King Aerys believed? It's not likely, given the tale of the Crannog man. Was it Howland Reed? It's possible, albeit again unlikely, given what is known of Howland Reed. The Weirwood sigil used by the Mystery Knight suggests the knight was one of the 3 Stark brothers, Brandon, Eddard and Benjen, given they had knowledge of Howland's plight. Yet given the Mystery Knight's short stature, it's hard to believe any of the 3 brothers fit. There are some who even suspect Lyanna Stark herself may very well have donned the ill-fitting armour, given her well-known, wild nature. But the reality is, there is not enough evidence to say with any level of certainty who the Knight of the Laughing Tree was, with it left up to each and every wanderer of the pages of history to decide for themselves. But the reason of all the mystery knights of history this one has stuck in the minds of people of Westeros is largely down to the events that would follow during the final days at Harrenhal. The excitement regarding the Mystery Knight, known as the Knight of the Laughing Tree, did prove to distract the attendees at the Great Tourney of Harrenhal from the behaviour and madness of King Aerys II. Well, for a few days at least. He did decree the knight be hunted and brought to justice. Many of the lords and knights present did participate in the search, which was led by Prince Rhaegar. But as we already know, the knight had vanished without a trace, with Prince Rhaegar himself finding the knight's laughing weirwood shield in a tree. The knight was gone, and their identity never known. But as things often are with King Aerys II's changeable nature, his attention quickly turned back to this so-called traitors' tourney, as he once again turned his focus to the apparent plotters and traitors that surrounded him. The tourney resumed, and before long, the sounds of splintered lances and sword on shield rang out once again. By the tourney's end, surprisingly to many in attendance, given the quality of participants, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen emerged as the ultimate victor, which displeased his father greatly, given Prince Rhaegar was chief among the king's suspected traitors. The Crown Prince, then 23 years of age, while a worthy and well-trained fighter, did not normally compete in tourneys. Thus he did surprise all by donning his ornate black and ruby armour and defeating every foe he faced, including 4 of the 7 Kingsguard knights. In the final tilt he came up against the legendary Sir Barristan Selmy, who even before his investiture as a Kingsguard knight was well regarded as one of the best lancers the 7 Kingdoms had seen in generations. Barristan the Bold was very much the favourite, as the oddmakers present would attest to, but to the shock of all, Prince Rhaegar emerged victorious, much to the joy of the lords and commons, to win the champion's laurels. It has been said that the cheering for the prince could be heard as far away as Lord Harroway's town, which given the number of people present, does seem at least possible if the winds blew in the right direction at the right time. But, despite the jubilation and triumph of his son and heir, King Aerys II did not join them in this celebration, but rather scowled as his expression became darker. Far from being proud at his heir's skill at arms and the love of the small folk and lords, King Aerys saw Rhaegar as a bigger threat now than ever before. It was not helped by Lord Chelstead and Lord Staunton of the King's Small Council, who inflamed and fed his suspicions further, declaring that Prince Rhaegar had only entered the lists to win favour with the commons and remind the lords assembled that he was the purest warrior and true heir to Aegon the Conqueror and the Iron Throne. That even if the truth came out, Rhaegar had not been the secret mastermind behind this tourney. Aerys believed he still could have used it to make his position against his father stronger. Aerys, deep in his madness by this point, was all too happy to believe any of these theories brought to him as this deep-rooted mistrust for his son deepened. But things would take a very unexpected turn that shocked all in attendance. A single moment that will forever change the history of Westeros, and is now looked back upon as the very start of what would become Robert's Rebellion. Prince Rhaegar, while being lauded in the glories of his victory, brought his horse to a stop in front of Lyanna Stark, the 14-year-old daughter of the Lord of Winterfell, and named her the Queen of Love and Beauty, placing a garland of blue roses in her lap with the tip of his lance. The cheering crowds were slowly brought to an uneasy silence as the king's lickspittles and councillors gathered around Aerys like flies to declare this proof of Rhaegar's traitorous intent. The naming of a beautiful young maiden as the Queen of Love and Beauty was of course a normal part of tourneys, but not when the victor's own lady wife watched from the stands. The prince had thus given insult to his own wife, the Princess Elia Martell of Dorne, in front of thousands of onlookers, from the highest nobility of Westeros to the lowest of commons. Aerys II's advisors told the king why would he do this if not to help him gain the Iron Throne and win the favour of House Stark. Some sources have stated that the crowning of the Stark girl was also quite odd, as many felt she was a young, thin, boyish girl with none of Elia Martell's delicate beauty. With this fact, Lord Simon Staunton presented to the king to prove even more so that Rhaegar was courting the Northern Lords. To some degree, this assumption does make sense from a certain point of view, but as the events that followed clearly show us, was ultimately wrong. Yet, if any of what the king believed were true, why did Lyanna's brothers, Brandon, Eddard and Benjen, seem so distraught at the honour the prince had bestowed upon her? Brandon Stark, known as the Wild Wolf, heir to Winterfell, had to be restrained from confronting Rhaegar there and then at what he took as a slight upon his sister's honour. Lyanna Stark had long been betrothed to Robert Baratheon, the young lord of Storm's End, for some time. Eddard Stark, Brandon's younger brother and close friend of Lord Robert, with both being fostered in the Vale by Lord Jon Arryn during their youth, was calmer, but no more pleased. Eddard Stark, even back then, was a young man known for his honour and calm demeanour. As for Robert Baratheon himself, well, some say he laughed at the prince's gesture, claiming that Rhaegar had done it no more than to pay Lyanna her due, which in truth was a rare diplomatic response by the hot-headed young lord. Those who knew him better say the young lord brooded on the insult, and that his heart hardened towards the Prince of Dragonstone from that day forth, where there might have once been kinship and respect. If this were the case, if Rhaegar had planned to use the crowning of Lyanna to gain the support of the North, then in doing so, he risked losing the support of Robert and the Stormlands. Thus, when men of history point to this as another reason as to why this was not a political move by Prince Rhaegar, the truth of the matter is, it was a simple garland of pale blue roses Rhaegar Targaryen had placed in the lap of Lyanna Stark that had begun a bloody dance that would rip the Seven Kingdoms and House Targaryen apart, bring his own death and that of thousands more, and put a new king and house upon the Iron Throne. The year of the false spring of 281 lasted less than 2 moon turns. As the year drew to a close, winter returned to Westeros with a bloody vengeance. On the last day of the year, snow began to fall upon King's Landing, and a small crust of ice formed atop the Blackwater Rush. The snowfall continued on and off for the best part of 2 weeks, by which time the Blackwater had frozen solid enough for people to walk on it, with icicles draping from the roofs of gutters of every building in the city. As the cold winds hammered the city, King Aerys, in his misguided attempt to help, turned to his pyromancers, charging them to drive off the winter with their magics. Huge green fires burned along the walls of the Red Keep for a moon's turn. Importantly, Prince Rhaegar was not in the city to observe them, nor could he be found at Dragonstone with Princess Elia and their young children, Rhaenys and the babe Aegon. With the coming of the new year, Rhaegar had taken to the road with 6 of his closest friends and confidants. While at the time no one knew of their destination, their journey took them back to the Riverlands. Not 10 leagues from Harrenhal, it is said that Rhaegar fell upon Lyanna Stark and carried her off, and in the process, lighting a fire that would consume his house, kin, and all of those he loved alongside half the realm itself. The abduction of Lyanna Stark by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen would set off a chain reaction that would result in the downfall of House Targaryen. Why the Crown Prince chose to kidnap Lyanna has been a question that has puzzled historians in its wake, and is likely to be a fierce subject of debate for decades to come. The obvious answer that most often accept is quite simple. Given the events at the tourney at Harrenhal, with Rhaegar unexpectedly crowning Lyanna as his Queen of Love and Beauty, the idea that Rhaegar was in love with Lyanna Stark is not a huge leap in logic. But the issue with this assumption is we have no record or source that suggests the pair shared a single word or interaction other than Rhaegar's crowning of her at Harrenhal. But the truth is, we can only ever know so much of what happens in the tense, dark halls and the thick woods that make up Harrenhal. How could we ever really know if a word was shared between Rhaegar and Lyanna? Regardless of motivation or intent, the event itself was already enough to light the tinder pile that was Westeros under King Aerys II Targaryen. Some less informed would question why Lyanna was anywhere near Harrenhal, but it would seem likely that she had travelled as part of her eldest brother's upcoming wedding. However, the exact circumstances as to why Lyanna was anywhere specifically near Harrenhal is another question altogether, and one that's unanswerable. News of the abduction spread like wildfire and found the ears of Lyanna's eldest brother, the hot-headed Brandon Stark, known as the Wild Wolf, who was 20 years of age at the time. Brandon and his entourage were en route to Riverrun to his wedding with the eldest daughter of Lord Hoster Tully, who was 17 years of age. This marriage pact between House Stark and House Tully was poised to be a powerful one, especially when you consider the other pacts agreed between House Tully and Arryn, as well as House Stark and Baratheon, creating a powerful quartet of alliances. A dangerous alliance for House Targaryen and King Aerys II, who may well have been right to be suspicious of his lords. Brandon was outraged at the abduction of his sister and would prove to live up to his nickname, the Wild Wolf. He would forego stopping at Riverrun and head straight for King's Landing with his companions, Ethan Glover, Albert Arryn, nephew to Lord Jon Arryn, and the heir to the Eyrie, Carl Royce, and Geoffrey Lannister. As the party rode with haste for the Red Keep, they did so assuming Prince Rhaegar would have fled there with his captive. Little did the Wild Wolf know this would be his undoing. As they stood outside the walls of the Red Keep, Brandon shouted for Prince Rhaegar to face him, return his sister, and come out to die. While Brandon's words never reached the ears of Prince Rhaegar, whose location was known only by a handful of people, they did reach the ears of the Mad King, sat upon his throne. King Aerys II had them all arrested for plotting the murder of the Crown Prince and summoned all of their fathers to court to answer their son's treason. King Aerys II had been mad and paranoid for years by this point. His nature was widely known. Brandon Stark, if he had kept a calmer head, surely would have known this course of action would only ever end in doom. But alas, the Wild Wolf was indeed wild, and provoked the rage of the Mad Dragon. Like his son, Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell had been on his way south with the wedding party for Brandon's wedding to Catelyn Tully, when Aerys II's demand for his presence in King's Landing to answer for his son's crimes reached him. Rickard made for the Red Keep, along with 200 of his own men as escort. None of them would ever see the North again, as in King's Landing, all who stood accused were executed to the delight of King Aerys II, with the sole exception of one person, Ethan Glover. Why Ethan was spared is another mystery we will never know the answer to. Some speculate he gave up key information to Aerys that he had knowledge of as a bargain for his life, perhaps the identity of the Knight of the Laughing Tree, or information regarding Prince Rhaegar, but all this really is just baseless speculation. Why was Ethan spared? We don't know. We won't ever know. But Ethan Glover certainly would have a role to play in the events to come. Many lords across the realm, even if they did not publicly say so, were horrified at the mass death ordered by King Aerys. For many, this even being the last straw in terms of their loyalties. While the fate of the Northmen seemed very brutal with no sense of justice or honour, but King Aerys II, even in his madness, did allow for trials. Trials of a sort, but trials with no honour or dignity, only brutal punishment. Lord Rickard, as is his right, demanded trial by combat, and as most would have expected, Aerys allowed for Rickard's request. Rickard dressed for battle and readied himself to face his opponents. Many believed that Aerys would call on a member of the Kingsguard to fight for the crown, as normally would have been expected, and would have been done. But Aerys had a sting in the tail. While fighting a member of the Kingsguard would have been a challenge for Rickard, to say the least, a man with no reputation for skill at arms, it would have at least been honourable and a fair trial. What Aerys had in mind was very much not. The Mad King declared fire to be the champion of House Targaryen as the throne room fell silent with confusion. Even as Aerys had Lord Rickard suspended from the rafters of the throne room, it had not yet dawned on many the intentions of the king. That is until Wisdom Rosard and the pyromancers of the Alchemist Guild entered. They kindled a blaze underneath the Lord of Winterfell. Brandon Stark was too brought into the throne room and placed in a special Tyroshi strangling device with a longsword placed just outside of his reach. Brandon was told he could try and free his father from his fiery fate, but the more Brandon struggled to reach the sword, the tighter the cord round his neck became. Those in the throne room looked on in horror as events played out, but none found the courage to intervene out of fear of sharing the fate of Rickard and Brandon. Brandon was strangled to death, attempting to reach the sword to save his father. Lord Rickard perhaps had a worse fate, being cooked alive slowly in his armour as the wildfire below raged. There are many mistakes and errors made that made Robert's rebellion inevitable. There are countless points that could have been points of no return. There are some that argue that even with the kidnap of Lyanna Stark by Prince Rhaegar, there still may have been a peaceful solution. But what is now called the murder of Lord Rickard and Brandon Stark and the other Northmen ensured no peaceful outcome was likely. But the Mad King would still go one step further and put the final nail in his coffin. He sent a raven to the Vale of Arryn to Lord Jon Arryn with orders to send him the heads of Lord Robert Baratheon of Storm's End, Lyanna's betrothed, and the now Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell after the deaths of his father and brother. The young lords had been wards of Jon Arryn for several years, with Aerys severely underestimating his position. Rather than meet the Mad King's demand, Lord Arryn instead raised his banners in revolt against the Mad King and House Targaryen, in turn setting off a chain of alliances. This single act of defiance is where many mark the start of what would become Robert's Rebellion.